For demand and supply diagram, I have reminded you for many times that you have to read the question carefully. So, just like in this question, in the first sentence, the most important point is the COVID-19 pandemic. That is, you have to think about whether the wage rate, demand, or supply changes. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, actually no passengers would be traveling to other countries, and that's why the airline companies will be firing some of the workers. The airline companies will be firing some of the workers. Then of course, airline companies are buyers or sellers. They are of course paying for the flight attendants. They are the buyers, and that's why there should be a drop in the demand. And what is the reason behind for the drop in demand? As we have learned in the first term, there are basically three reasons for the change in demand. We have the substitutes, we have the complements, and also the derived demand. And this time, what should it be? It should be derived demand, right? Derived demand. And it is because the passengers or the people are not purchasing the airline services, and that's why the airline companies are not employing the flight attendants, and this is the reason for the change in demand. And for the second sentence, the most important word is the word resulted. And what does it mean here is that we haven't got any unemployment at the beginning, but later on, after the change in demand, we have the unemployment. And somehow, initially, we don't have any surplus, and now we have the surplus. And that's why initially W should be found at the intersection point. But the new W and the new equilibrium, if you compare them, W should be later on higher than the equilibrium so that we have the surplus, and that means the unemployment. So many of you in the examination, when you drew the diagram, so you didn't have the surplus in your diagram. You must have the surplus in the diagram. And let us now draw the diagram together. So what we have to do is to complete coordinate plane first. So we have quantity here in the x-axis, but how about the y-axis? Should I write down price? Actually not. This is about the flight attendant, and we should write down wage rate here for the y-axis. And afterwards, let us use red color to draw the initial supply, demand, and price, and also quantity transacted. So initially, we have the normal supply curve, normal demand curve. And as I've mentioned before, we don't have any unemployment at the beginning. And that's why W1 should be found from the intersection point. And Q1 should also be at the intersection point. So we have W and also Q here. And afterwards, what happens next is that we have a new demand curve, as I have just mentioned. The demand decreases. Then we should add D2 on the left-hand side here. So this is D2. And as we have already discussed, the new W should be higher than the new equilibrium. And that means, should we find W2 here at the new intersection point? Actually not. Otherwise, we don't have any surplus and we don't have any unemployment. What we have to do is that the new W should be above this intersection point. However, the question hasn't mentioned anything about the wage rate, and that's why in that case, I can assume that the W doesn't change, maybe because of the contract. And we can keep the W here, and you go from the left to the right, then there are 2 points A and also B that you may find out. And Q2 should be equal to A or B. It must be the smaller one, right? So, and that's why we have Q2 here. And finally, we should write down the new surplus besides the diagram to explain that we have a new surplus, AB here. Then let us go to the next page. After drawing the diagram, how about the paragraph? So as I have mentioned, we use derived demand to explain the change in demand this time. And we have learned in the first term that there is a sentence to explain the derived demand, right? So you have to say that demand for blah 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 is the derived demand of blah blah blah. And in this sentence, you can see that we have two stuffs, x and y. They should be both something that some people buy or some people pay for. So say, for example, I can say that if we purchase a smartphone, the smartphone manufacturer or the producer need to purchase electronic chips, 晶片啦. And that's why I can say demand for chips is a derived demand of smartphone. Both chips and smartphone are something that we pay for or some people pay for. So smartphone is paid by us and the chips are paid by the iPhone, by the Apple or Samsung, by the company. And the second example is we can say that the demand for sales agents is the derived demand of jewelry. So a jewelry here is actually something that the buyers pay for, right? At the same time, because the buyers buy this one, and in the shop there should be some sales agents helping the transaction, right? And that's why we have the companies paying for the sales agents. And that means, okay, they are both the sales agents and the jewelry are both something that somebody pays for, and we can use the sentence to explain their relationship. And back to our examination question. So we know that the examination is about the flight attendants. There is no problem for that. But some of your classmates wrote something like that. You said that the demand for flight attendants is a derived demand of COVID-19 pandemic. My question is anybody paying for or willing to buy the pandemic? Of course not. This is not something, this is not a good or service that people pay money for. And that's why we shouldn't mention something like that. We shouldn't mention something like that. What we should mention is, so because fewer people buy the airline tickets, and that's why the airline companies employ a smaller number of flight attendants. This part should be the airline tickets or the airline services rather than the pandemic. How come you purchase the pandemic? No one is going to purchase the pandemic, right? And that's why don't mention something like that so ridiculous. And now let me go to the table below. So this answer here includes 4 mistakes shown by your classmates in the examination. You can pause for a while, read this answer, and see if you can figure out the 4 mistakes. So what is the first mistake? You can find it out in the diagram. The first mistake is that you shouldn't use price in the diagram. It should be wage rate, right? Sorry. So it should be wage rate. So this is the first mistake. And where is the second mistake? The second mistake, you can see, as I've just mentioned, for this sentence about derived demand, they should be something that people purchase. I guess nobody is purchasing the industry. 買起成個航空業. So this is ridiculous to say something like that. So it should be the airline tickets or the airline services. And the third mistake, can you figure it out? Yes, after talking about the demand, you should always mention something about the wage rate and also the quantity transacted. Okay, so here what you have to write down is the wage rate, W, remains unchanged, and Q decreases. So don't miss this one. You need to state these two, the change in price for W and also the change in Q for every question. And the last mistake is initially we don't have any surplus. Now we have the surplus and you need to explain why. So you have to tell me that the W is larger than the equilibrium.